There is a moment in every great scandal when someone, somewhere, makes a decision they believe the world will never find out about. A handshake in a private room, a suitcase passed through a hotel corridor, a vote cast not for the best nation, but for the highest bidder. This is the story of how the most watched sporting event on Earth was sold. Not earned, not awarded, sold. And for years, nobody was supposed to know. The FIFA World Cup is more than a football tournament. It is a cultural phenomenon that stops the planet every 4 years. Billions of eyes, billions of dollars. And for the men sitting at the top of the game's governing body, it represented something else entirely. The most powerful currency on Earth. The power to decide where dreams are born and where fortunes are made. By the late 1990s, FIFA had quietly transformed from a football organization into something far more dangerous, a political machine, a cartel dressed in football jerseys. And at its center stood one man whose name would eventually become synonymous with corruption on a scale the sport had never seen before: Sepp Blatter. He became FIFA president in 1998, charming, strategic, untouchable. For nearly 2 decades, he ruled world football with an iron grip, distributing favors, building loyalty, and constructing a network of power that stretched from Zurich to every corner of the globe. But what nobody realized at the time was that the entire system was rotten from the inside. The first cracks appeared long before the world was paying attention. Allegations of vote buying during World Cup hosting bids had circulated in football circles for years. Whispers, rumors, stories passed between journalists who could never quite pin down the evidence. FIFA dismissed every accusation. Blatter smiled and shook hands and moved on. Then came 2010. Russia and Qatar won the rights to host the 2018 and 2022 World Cups respectively. The decisions were announced on the same December afternoon in Zurich. The football world reacted with stunned silence, not because the decisions were unexpected to those on the inside, but because to everyone watching from the outside, they made almost no sense. Qatar, a nation smaller than the state of Connecticut, a country with no football culture, no infrastructure, and summer temperatures that regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, a country that had never qualified for a World Cup in its history. And yet, somehow, Qatar had beaten the United States, Australia, Japan, and South Korea to host the biggest sporting event in human history. Behind closed doors, a very different story was unfolding. The FBI had been watching for years. American law enforcement had quietly built one of the most complex international sports corruption cases ever assembled. They had followed the money. They had turned witnesses. They had gathered evidence that most people inside FIFA believed would never surface. On the morning of May 27, 2015, Swiss police moved into the Bauer Olak Hotel in Zurich, one of the most luxurious hotels in Europe, the traditional gathering place of FIFA's elite. They arrested 7 senior FIFA officials before breakfast. The images traveled around the world within minutes. Men in suits being escorted from a 5-star hotel by Swiss authorities. The football world watched in disbelief. But what happened next shocked the football world even further. The United States Department of Justice unsealed an indictment that was breathtaking in its scope. 14 individuals charged, over $150 million in bribes and kickbacks alleged, corruption spanning more than 2 decades, sports marketing contracts, TV rights deals, World Cup hosting votes. Everything had a price. Everything was for sale. The indictment read like a crime novel, except none of it was fiction. Among those named were men who had sat on FIFA's executive committee, men who had cast votes to award World Cups, men who had publicly praised FIFA's integrity while privately cashing checks that should never have existed. One name that appeared repeatedly in the investigation was Jack Warner, the former FIFA vice president and CONCACAF president from Trinidad and Tobago, a man who had operated within football's corridors of power for decades. Warner would eventually face a 29-count indictment in the United States. He fled to Trinidad. He fought extradition. He gave bizarre press press conferences. He claimed he was being persecuted, but the evidence told a different story. Investigators alleged that Jack Warner had accepted bribes connected to South Africa's successful bid to host the 2010 World Cup. $10 million, it was claimed, passed through accounts connected to Warner under the guise of a FIFA development grant for the Caribbean Football Union. The money, prosecutors alleged, largely disappeared, and Warner was just one piece of a far larger puzzle. The truth remained hidden for years, but slowly, painstakingly, the full picture began to emerge. Whistleblowers came forward, financial records were examined, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, and Switzerland were traced. The picture that emerged was of a system so comprehensively corrupted that it was almost impossible to know where the legitimate football organization ended and the criminal enterprise began. At the center of the Qatar investigation were specific and deeply troubling allegations. Mohamed bin Hammam, a Qatari football official and former FIFA Executive Committee member, was alleged to have played a central role in securing votes for Qatar's bid. He was later banned from all football-related activity for life, not once, but twice, by FIFA's own ethics committee. Payments, favors, promises. The allegations painted a picture of a bid campaign that left almost nothing to chance and showed very little respect for the rules. And yet, the 2022 World Cup went ahead in Qatar. $44 billion. That is the estimated total cost of Qatar's preparations. New stadiums built from scratch in a country that had never hosted anything close to this scale. New metro systems, new roads, new hotels, an entirely new city, Lusail, constructed in the desert to host the final. But behind the gleaming architecture and the perfectly manicured pitches, there was a human story that much of the world preferred not to look at too closely. Migrant workers, hundreds of thousands of them, from Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, the Philippines. They had come to Qatar with the promise of work and a better life. What many of them found was something far darker: excessive working hours and extreme heat, wage theft, passport confiscation, living conditions that human rights organizations described as modern slavery. In 2021, The Guardian published an investigation that estimated over 6,500 migrant workers had died in Qatar since the country won the World Cup bid in 2010. The Qatari government disputed the figures. FIFA expressed concern. The construction continued. One decision changed everything about how we were supposed to feel watching those matches in November and December of 2022. Could you watch a penalty shootout in that gleaming stadium and forget how it was built? Could you celebrate a goal under those floodlights and ignore the lives that may have been lost in their construction? For some fans, the answer was yes. For others, it was the question that haunted every single match of the tournament. Meanwhile, back in Zurich, the fallout from the 2015 arrests continued to reshape FIFA. Sepp Blatter, who had initially survived the initial wave of arrests, resigned just 4 days after publicly declaring he had the confidence of the football world. He was subsequently banned from football for 8 years by FIFA's own ethics committee. The man who had spent decades building a monument to his own power watched it collapse around him in a matter of weeks. His replacement, Gianni Infantino, arrived promising a new era of transparency and reform, clean hands, a fresh start, a FIFA that would earn back the trust of the football world. But nobody realized at the time that the story was far from over. In 2022, Swiss prosecutors announced they were investigating Infantino himself. The allegations centered on secret meetings between Infantino and the Swiss Attorney General, who had been overseeing investigations into FIFA. The meetings, which took place before any public knowledge of the investigation, raised profound questions about potential conflicts of interest and the independence of the process designed to clean up world football. Infantino denied any wrongdoing. He called the investigation politically motivated. He moved FIFA's headquarters, at least in part, from Switzerland to avoid certain legal jurisdictions. The investigation continued. The man brought in to fix FIFA's corruption problem was himself under criminal investigation. It would almost be funny if the stakes were not so high. Because this is not just a story about corrupt men in expensive suits. It is a story about what happens when power concentrates in the hands of a few, when accountability disappears, and when the love of a sport, a pure, global, unifying love, is weaponized for private gain. Football belongs to the billions of people who play it on dusty pitches in Karachi and concrete courts in Sao Paulo and school fields in Lagos. It belongs to the child who stays up past midnight to watch their team in a tournament played in a country they will never visit. It belongs to the fan who saves for months to buy a shirt, who dreams of attending a World Cup, who believes in the simple, beautiful idea that on a football pitch, anything is possible. Those people were never consulted. Their game was sold without their knowledge or consent. And perhaps the most disturbing truth of all is this: almost nobody has truly been held accountable. Some men were arrested, some were banned, some paid fines, a handful went to prison, but the World Cups awarded during those years of corruption went ahead. The money was spent, the tournaments were played, the bids that may have been bought were never rerun, the hosts were never changed. The football world watched, reacted with outrage, then gradually moved on, which raises the question that has never been fully answered. The question that sits beneath every World Cup announcement, every hosting decision, every backroom vote that shapes the future of the game. Has anything actually changed? FIFA publishes compliance reports. It has restructured its ethics committee. It has introduced financial transparency measures. It points to reforms and pledges accountability. Gianni Infantino speaks of a new FIFA with great regularity and considerable confidence. But the 2030 World Cup will be hosted across 6 countries on 3 continents. The 2034 World Cup was awarded to Saudi Arabia, another Gulf state with a controversial human rights record, in a process that many football observers described as lacking genuine competition. The bid was essentially unopposed. The vote was taken by a show of hands at a FIFA Congress. Does that sound like a new FIFA? Does that sound like an organization that learned its lesson? Or does that sound like an organization that learned something different entirely? That the outrage fades, that the news cycle moves on, that if you wait long enough, the world will find something else to be angry about. The corruption that the United States Department of Justice exposed in 2015 did not begin in 2015. It had been building for decades. It had survived because the people who knew stayed silent, because the people who suspected looked away, and because the people who benefited made sure the system was designed to protect itself. Football is the world's game. It deserves better than this. But wanting something and getting it are two very different things. And as long as the World Cup remains the most valuable sporting property on Earth, as long as billions of dollars flow through the corridors of FIFA's headquarters, and as long as the men making the decisions face insufficient consequences for the choices they make, the temptation will remain. The suitcases will still be packed, the hotel rooms will still be booked, the handshakes will still happen where no cameras can see, and somewhere, in a private room that the world will never hear about, the next decision will be made. The question is not whether anyone is watching, the question is whether anyone is willing to do something about what they see.